This is Sports Spectrum, the sports and faith podcast where we bring Jesus into the conversation. Here's your host, Jason Romano.
What's up, guys? Welcome to the show. This is Sports Spectrum. I am Jason Romano. So glad that you're tuning into the show today. Very excited for our guest, Dave Buehring. This is going to be a conversation that you're going to want to take notes on, a pen, get a paper, notebook, whatever it is, however you take notes, and listen to this conversation on discipleship with Dave Buehring. You're going to love this. Before we get to our conversation with Dave, I want to tell you a couple things. First, our website, sportspectrum.com. That's a great place to go for all of our content. We want you to bookmark that site and just go back there as often as you can each and every day, because there's new content updated every day. There's stories, articles. We got a daily devotional Monday through Friday, new daily devotionals each and every weekday. And all of our podcasts are there, including Sports Spectrum's, this one, but also all of the podcasts that are a part of Sports Spectrum's podcast network, including Recalibrated, Table 40, Football Sunday. They're all there and available for free to listen to read, to consume over at sportspectrum.com. Second, if you have an idea, a story, a guest that you would like to see appear on Sports Spectrum, whether it's our website, in our magazine, or on our podcast, you can reach me directly via email, jason@sportspectrum.com, jason@sportspectrum.com. And that's a great way to just let us know what you think. Maybe you have a connection. Maybe you know someone personally that you think would be a good guest. And obviously we can't say yes to every single one of the referrals, but I can tell you a bunch of interviews that we've done, a very good amount, have come from referrals or people sending us an email or even tweeting or letting us know, hey, you should have this person on. Or, hey, my friend is this person who has this incredible story. And that's how we learn about a lot of these stories that we have on our show. So you can email me directly if you have an idea, jason@sportspectrum.com. We are presented today by Water Mission, the nonprofit Christian engineering ministry that fights the global water crisis with safe water, sanitation, and hygiene solutions, developing countries in disaster areas. The organization has served more than 5 million people around the globe in 56 countries, and the work they do is so important. 2.1 billion people around the world lack access to safe water. 2.1 billion people, and Water Mission is doing something about it. This is a great organization to get involved with, to donate, to support. Check them out at watermission.org, fighting the global water crisis. You can learn more at the website and pray for them and donate, sow into this ministry, watermission.org. We're also presented today by Compassion International, the most trusted child development ministry in the world. And the COVID-19 pandemic has completely disrupted the world, obviously. But as a result, there are nearly 70,000 kids in Compassion's program who are currently unfunded. So Compassion has partnered with pro athletes to put together this initiative called Fill the Stadium. It's a professional athlete-led initiative with Compassion to stand in the gap by providing food, medical care, and support for those 70,000 children, a stadium's worth of kids in crisis. You can learn more and donate and sow into this important initiative with Compassion right now by going to fillthestadium.com. That's the website, fillthestadium.com. This is a stadium that cannot remain empty. fillthestadium.com. Today on the show, I am very excited to welcome Dave Buehring. He's a pastor and an author. For more than 40 years, Dave has discipled believers who lead in their workplaces and those in ministry to live godly lives. He's an author as well. As I mentioned, he wrote a book called The Great Opportunity, Making Disciples of Jesus in Every Vocation, and he leads a cool ministry called LIONSHARE, through which he shapes leaders in the ways of God and makes disciple makers worldwide. That's what this conversation's about, making disciple makers. We're talking about the Great Commission here, Jesus telling us to go and make disciples and obey everything that he has commanded. That's what this conversation is about. Of course, we talk some football, some sports in here as well. Dave's a big Minnesota Vikings fan. He's got a great story about a time that he visited a very memorable and historic NFL game some 45 years ago. But then we get into the meat and potatoes here of discipleship. And I love this conversation. I think you guys will too. Take a listen to Dave Buehring joining us here today on Sports Spectrum. Dave, welcome to Sports Spectrum. How are you, sir?
I'm good. Thanks for letting me hang out with you today.
Absolutely. I love how we got connected through our mutual friend, Kent Chevalier, who is the Pittsburgh Steelers chaplain. Kent was on the show a couple months ago and just doing a great work and a great job in Pittsburgh, leading the guys there from a spiritual perspective. But wanted to start with you because the very first Super Bowl that the Steelers ever won goes back to 1975, and they beat the Minnesota Vikings. And I understand you're a pretty big Vikings fan.
You know what? I grew up there. I live in Franklin, Tennessee now, but I grew up there. So I still tell people I'm a diehard Vikings fan, which usually means I die hard every year.
I understand. The 70s were not kind to the Buehring family.
No, they were not kind. Not at all.
So your earliest memory, we were talking offline before we started, you were actually at a pretty famous football game as a kid, weren't you?
Yeah, I was indeed. So during that 75 season, the Vikings, they'd made a couple of Super Bowls, swings and misses in both of them, but this was a great Vikings team. And so my dad gets tickets, and my brother, my dad, my cousin, and I go to what's now known as the Hail Mary game. Oh. And we were sitting in the opposite end zone where the big throw happened. And it was it was the first time in my life I was ever in a stadium where I just heard quiet. Could have heard a pin drop on the turf. It was amazing. But yeah, sad day as a Viking fan, but fun to be a part of a historical event.
It's crazy. It's 45 years in late December of 75. It's 45 years now here in 2020 into 2021 that game took place. And I think about Drew Pearson, Roger Staubach throwing the touchdown. There was actually I know this because I'm a diehard Dallas Cowboys fan, which by the way, Dave, more dying hard than in celebrating and actually enjoying being a Cowboys fan in the last 25 years. But that game, it's funny now because I don't even think they called it a Hail Mary on the play that Staubach threw to Pearson. It was just like a long bomb that you hope is caught for a touchdown at the end of a game. And it's birthed this thing now where you see Hail Marys every week. And sometimes when they catch it, you're like, oh my goodness, can't believe he caught that.
It's amazing. And you do know, Jason, right, that Drew Pearson pushed off. You know that every Viking fan knows this.
Let me tell you something, Dave. I've watched that highlight hundreds of times. I'm an NFL films junkie and I love watching old NFL films highlights. And it was the comeback, right? So the ball was underthrown and he kind of slips and pushes back. It could have been called. I've seen many worse offenses not called.
I would agree.
I'm glad it wasn't called because obviously Dallas won. I think that's the year they ended up in the Super Bowl with Pittsburgh too. So who knows what would have happened. It's funny to think about the 70s. I'm too young. My first memory of really understanding the Cowboys or remembering is like 79, 80 when I was 6 or 7 years old. But those 70s NFL, I think the 70s might be the best decade for the NFL. When you think about it, it was just dominated by 6 or 7 teams like the Rams, Vikings, Cowboys. In the AFC, it was the Raiders and the Steelers. And you think about those teams, Dolphins, Broncos, and you're like, man, what a decade, what an era for football.
Yeah, it was amazing. And, I think, Jason, you'll have to do your checking out on this one. But I believe what happened was after that game, it was Roger Staubach that made the comment about throwing up a Hail Mary. And that's where it stuck. I think that's true.
It would not surprise me because I know he was a very devoutly religious man. So it would not surprise me if that took place. Dave Buehring is joining us here on Sports Spectrum. So you were a Vikings fan from a young age. You actually had a really neat experience too, I understand, in high school, kind of doing what I went through as a broadcaster, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I'm a junior in high school, and I was working on sports stories for our school paper. And in my senior year, I was designated to be the sports editor for our school paper. The school, about a couple thousand people, high school, 10th, 11th, 12th grade. So it was a big school. And my journalism teacher came to me And she said, Dave, I got 2 tickets to go to the Vikings game. I want to give them to you. Take your brother with you, but you need to make me a deal. I said, what's that? She said, you need to get me an interview. And so I get to my seats. It's in the end zone, second deck, maybe 4 or 5 seats up. And sitting right in front of me is an old Viking legend by the name of Dave Osborne. Bill Brown and Dave Osborne were the early running backs on those 70s Viking teams. And he had just retired. And so I visited with him. I thought, I'm good. I got my interview, Well, we watched the game. Chuck Foreman, who is the Vikings' outstanding running back, he was kind of the first guy that started catching the ball more out of the backfield. Incredible numbers, not only running, but catching out of the backfield. And so anyway, played out of his mind. And so I thought, I'm going to take my little Minnesota High School Press Pass Association card and go down with the big boys. Well, I'm on the elevator going down with Howard Cosell, which that was an amazing moment.
That's one of my heroes. That's crazy.
Yeah. And I'm standing in front of the Vikings locker room, and out comes Chuck Foreman at a fast pace. And I'm walking with him, and I'm looking around like, where are the other reporters? And I'm walking with him, and I just said, Chuck, Dave Buehring, Mounds View High School, can I get an interview with you? And he says, absolutely. Well, I called the Vikings the next day because he said, just call them. And I look in the directory in the program, because it's about the only way you could get it. And I called, and the person said to me, Dave, absolutely not. There's no way this can happen. So wow. I go and I find the PR guy, and I explain my situation. He said, you know what? He shouldn't have said that, but we'll make sure it happens. And sure enough, about a week later, they said, just stand at the tunnel at the old Metropolitan Stadium. And as they come off the practice, so literally I'm standing there, and I'm looking up as Alan Page, Carl Eller, Jim Marshall all walk by. And no kidding, Jason, my eyes are up. And then all of a sudden there's blank space. And I look down, and there's Fran Tarkenton. And I had no idea how small he was with how gifted he was. But Foreman was the first one out the field and said, I'll be right with you. And sure enough, calls me in the locker room. So imagine as a senior in high school sitting in the entryway of the Vikings locker room. And I have this all on cassette yet because I recorded it.
You still have it?
I still got it.
That's amazing. You need to put that on Instagram or something, Dave. That's amazing.
Yeah, I probably should. Yeah. And so as I'm interviewing Chuck, all the Vikings guys are walking by, doing a little high school reporting, all this kind of stuff. So it was a fun moment. It ended up being a great article in our high school newspaper. So it was a fun time for me.
Yeah. The Purple People Eaters, man, those teams were a lot of fun. And I tell people the 70s were a hard decade, but if you're a Vikings fan, it's kind of like the Bills in the 90s. You still appreciate the fact that you went to all those Super Bowls, even though you lose, because your team, it's hard to win and hard to get to those games every single year. So you appreciate it, right?
Indeed. Yep, indeed.
Dave Buehring is joining us here on Sports Spectrum. All right. So your faith, obviously this is a sports and faith podcast, and the work that you're doing right now with LIONSHARE, making disciple makers, is so important. I want to dive into that in a second, but give us sort of the Cliff Notes snapshot version of your faith journey and kind of where it took shape and began for you.
Yeah. So I'm very grateful, Jason. I grew up in a home environment where my mom was the 4:30 in the morning, get up and intercede for the world kind of person. And so she prayed for my dad and my brother, Tom, and I, and then my dad, I watched him leave business when I was about 13, 14 years of age, because he just had this hunger to go back to school and learn more about the Lord. So we relocated from my family roots are Minnesota, but we were living in San Diego at the time, then back to Minnesota. So dad could go to college there. It was during that time in my own journey when I was 13 that I really made my own response to Jesus. Following high school, I was going to go in to do the kinds of things, Jason, you're doing. And instead, the Lord had me head off to Youth with a Mission, YWAM, which is the largest missions organization in the world. And while I was there, I was discipled by several leaders, one of them being Loren Cunningham, the founder of YWAM. He just spoke deeply into my life. And he's the guy that challenged me. I was traveling a bit with him, and on a flight, I was 20, and he said, Dave, what do you think your gifts are? And, at 20, it's kind of like, well, you're guessing. And he said this to me, Jason. He said, look, it doesn't matter how big the groups are that you will lead or the size of the groups that you will teach. The way that God will measure the fruit of your life is have you invested to the third and fourth generation. And he quoted to me 2 Timothy 2:2, where Paul, first generation, Timothy second, faithful ones third, others fourth. And it marked me. It marked me so that even though maybe if I preach a good sermon or I do a good job leading something, the way that I measure fruit is, have I invested in somebody's life enough, A, that they live it, and B, that they're passing it on to someone else.
That's a great, awesome story. And so you have this passion now for making disciple makers. And I think it's, you think about making disciple makers as opposed to, no, just making disciples. Jesus talking
Yeah.
about the Great Commission, go and make disciples, but you
Yeah.
specifically catered it towards those words, making disciple makers. So let's talk about discipleship.
Yeah.
What is a disciple maker?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Jason. And when Jesus said, go make disciples, the language there speaks of reproducing. And so that's why we play off of it and say making disciple makers. And so it's the intentional relationship you have with someone or people in your life that you're purposely pouring into them the things of God. And what we do is we focus a lot on three things: is helping people get to know God's character. Because one of the things I find, Jason, of why people those that don't know the Lord, why they don't want to come to the Lord, and even those that are followers of Jesus who have difficult times wrestling through things, is they don't see who God really is. And I don't mean in a general sense, well, that Jesus is the Lord and the King of Kings. I mean knowing that God is just, that he's kind, that he's merciful, that he's kind and gracious, and these different attributes of his character. So we help people kind of remove the misrepresentations they have of God and help them see him for what he really is. Because if you see him for who he really is, you can't help but fall in love with him, right?
Yeah.
And then we also teach people God's ways. And what I mean by that is the ways of God is how God does things. So if the character of God is the who, it's the ways of God is how he does things. Like, for example, you would know this: if you want to be great in the kingdom of God, you got to become the greatest servant.
That's
All
right.
right. So it's how we do things. And I find oftentimes that the translation of those things, not just in your personal journey with the Lord, but within your vocation, that's where you can make an impact. Because if you do things God's way or how he does things, you can make a great impact.
So why do so many Christians, those who profess a faith in Christ, why do they struggle with discipleship making? Because even in our church, and I'm one of the leaders in our church, we find that's always the goal, is to continue to make disciples of Jesus. But it becomes, I don't know, it's difficult for a lot of Christians to believe that they could then help disciple others, because I don't know enough about the Bible. I don't have, this experience. I didn't go to ministry training or into seminary, so I don't know if I can do that. Why is that such a struggle?
Yeah, and you're nailing it, Jason. Those excuses plus time, those are kind of the top excuses. But here's the deal: if you've never been discipled, you don't know what it looks like. And here's the deal. So, and again, this might be surprising, but somewhere around 80 to 90% of pastors have never been discipled. So you're not going to create a disciple making culture. Like, they got educated, they got trained, but do you know, in most, whether it's you call it a Bible school or a seminary, whatever, do you know that they don't even have like a disciple making 101 course? It's not there. It's just not there. So I don't say that to blame or point fingers. I'm just trying to do that to give understanding. Is like, if we're not understanding that this is the last command of Jesus that he asked us to do, it's like we're in this place where we have focused so much on Bible studies without application that we end up with a lot of head knowledge and not heart transformation. And so we come alongside and work with churches as well as walk with societal leaders so we can help churches, but we also want to help leaders in society say, okay, now that you've grown in your faith and you see how that can impact what you do in your vocation, let me help you do the same. And so there is, you're nailing it, Jason. There's a huge void out there. And one of the things that I encourage people with is you don't have to have a master's degree in theology. All you got to do is be a step ahead in your walk with the Lord.
Sports Spectrum today is presented by Compassion International, the most trusted child development ministry in the world. And we're talking about COVID-19 impacting a lot of people around this world. And with Compassion, children around the world are living in poverty, and the issue of food has got really bad. It's gone from simply being hungry to starvation. The pandemic has magnified these children's needs, and they are truly in crisis. So we're partnering with an organization called Compassion International, and you know about them. They help kids in poverty all around the world meet their basic needs like food, clean water, and education so they can not only survive but reach their full potential. And of course, this past spring of 2020, most of the events that Compassion International relies on to help sponsor these children in crisis were canceled due to the pandemic, leaving 70,000 kids in desperate need of help. Now, 70,000 also happens to be the average size of many pro football stadiums that were once filled and now sit mostly empty. Each of the 70,000 empty seats represents a child in crisis who needs you, who needs all of us to step up and fill the stadium. Now think about this. For the cost of a couple of tickets, food and drinks to the game, that of course few can attend right now, you can help one child for an entire year through Compassion International. So we're teaming up with Compassion. You can team up as well to fill the stadium and help these kids in crisis. Join us by going to fillthestadium.com, clicking Give Now, and helping to release children from poverty. This is a stadium that cannot remain empty. fillthestadium.com. We're also presented today by Water Mission, a nonprofit Christian engineering ministry fighting the global water crisis. Yes, there is a global water crisis. Listen to these statistics. 2.1 billion people lacking access to safe water. 4.4 billion people lacking access to adequate sanitation. Those were billions with a B. That is insane that many people don't have access to the things that you and I take for granted: safe water and adequate sanitation. Listen to this. Around the world, women spend 200 million hours every day simply walking to get water, and one person dies every 37 seconds from water-related illnesses. And right now, Water Mission is working to stop the global spread of COVID-19 by providing urgently needed safe water, sanitation, and hygiene solutions to refugee settlements and other vulnerable communities. We love Water Mission. I think you guys will too. You need to go pray for them right now if you could, because the work that they're doing is so important. And if you feel led, please donate. Please support Water Mission and the great work they're doing. And check them out at their website, watermission.org. Watermission.org, fighting the global water crisis. Thinking back to maybe 2014, 2015, when I had no desire to ever speak or preach or anything like that. So it's not that long ago. I was invited to speak at a small men's breakfast of about 60 or 70 guys, about 30 minutes from here at a church. And they asked me, because I said, what do you want me to talk about? And they said, well, you work at ESPN. Why don't you share what it's like to be a Christian in the workplace? And I thought, okay, I haven't really thought about that, but okay, let's figure this out. And that put me on a journey, along with a few other topics, to really exploring the idea of living out your faith in the workplace, being a Christian and kind of making disciples in your vocation. And you write about that. That's one of your expertise. You wrote a great book called The Great Opportunity, Making Disciples of Jesus in Every Vocation. So as we speak to athletes, coaches, others in the sports world who listen to this show, let's talk about that, being a Christian in the workplace, because a lot of guys struggle with that. But I think sports can really be a great place for discipleship.
Oh, it's huge. My own journey, Jason, of course, this is a very minuscule level compared to, professional athletes, but I coached high school football for 5 years, and, I enjoyed it. We took a team that had just started, and, at the end of the third year, we won a championship, and it was a lot of fun. But, what was important was football was valuable, but there was something even more eternal that I had to keep in mind. And that was investing in these sophomores, juniors, and seniors in high school. And to watch where some of them have gone today, because we had the privilege of pouring into them, was a lot of fun. And today still, like, the mall is about 2 miles away from here. And if I'm walking in the mall, sometimes with my wife, I'll hear this, "Hey, coach." And it's the kid that I last saw at 18 years of age, who's now 34. And he's married and got kids. And we have to realize that the intentionality that can come through the relational camaraderie that's there in sport, it's huge. And but oftentimes the missing piece, Jason, is we don't be deliberate about it. And so there is a deliberate thing that has to do with disciple making.
Yeah, I think I usually say be intentional but never forceful. Would you say that's right?
That's a
approach?
Great way of saying it. Yeah. And so here's the language I use on this, Jason, is, you know, to the degree you have relationship, to that same degree you have authority to speak into somebody's life.
Right.
And so if you don't have relationship, they're not going to hear you. But if you have relationship, they're going to be open to hear from you. And matter of fact, when I'm often asked, so Dave, how do you decide who you should disciple? And a friend of mine has said it this way. He said, start by asking yourself this question: in whose ears are my words big? So let me say that again, because it's a new way of saying something. In whose ears are my words big? So in other words, when you say something to somebody, not only do they listen to it, but they do it, and they often are coming back for more. When that happens, so if you play professional sports and you're realizing that your words are big in someone's ears, and you're a follower of Jesus, you can't get back to that thing of, well, they're older, they're younger, they're better than me, they're more important. We just have to realize that God is giving you favor in their life. And
That's
if
really
God's giving you favor,
said.
go ahead.
No, I was going to say that's really well said. Keep going.
Yeah. So it's like God's giving you favor in their life. So realize that as if it's like God himself kind of pointing and saying, I want you to see this. And so one of the things that we do is we just tell people, take a sheet of paper on your iPhone or something, list all the people that you know right now where your words are big in theirs. Don't worry about the ones you wish your words were big in. Don't worry about them. God's got them covered elsewhere. But where are your words big? And jot those names down and begin to pray over them. And begin to say, okay, Lord, is this somebody that you would have me begin to invest in? And that's oftentimes, Jason, how I form the groups that I invest in. That's my starting point.
Mm-hmm.
And there's other processes that get it down to, okay, here's the ones, but that's a good starting point.
So that's the starting point, but what are some more practical ways that a coach or someone in sports can implement a discipleship program? And what does that look like? Are you simply going to get coffee and having some breakfast and just talking about God? Are you making it intentional to, once we can not social distance anymore, having people over at the house? Like, what does that look like?
No, that's great. So let's just say you've made your list, you're praying over it. Here's one of the things that I look for is, and it's my at 61 just way to remember this, but I look for people who are fast. And so here's what I mean by that. The F stands for faithful versus flaky.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, if you're going to spend time with them and you guys make a commitment to do something, you're in. And we have to remember this. Let me just make this little nuance here. There's a difference between being someone's friend, shepherding or pastoring someone, which is kind of caring for their needs, and discipling them. Discipling them is the highest level of commitment, which, and unfortunately, Jason, we often lower the bar so low that we're not getting the maturity that we're shooting for.
Sure.
And so I look for people who are faithful. So if they say, Dave, I'm in, I know they're going to be in. Okay. A is available, which means they're actually going to put it on that time frame in their calendar on their phone. So I know they're going to be there. The S one for me is servant-hearted, which speaks more of an attitude. Like, when I give them stuff, are they going to serve other people with this? And then the T is teachable. Who likes to be pouring into man, I know that, you want to find. So I look for people. So here's my pool where my words are big in their ears. And then I narrow it down by within that pool, who are people right now that are fast? Mm-hmm. And then the last kind of step for me on identifying is I will look them all in the eyeball once I kind of know who it is. And I'll just say, look, are you willing to match my commitment? Because you're talking about, like, I did this, I do a lot of this online. And so, I got East Coast guys are saying 6:30 a.m., and I'm saying, that's great. It's 5:30 a.m. Franklin, Tennessee time. And I'm an early guy, so that's not a problem. But I said to them, I need to know that I'm not using Zoom as a mirror. I have them in my home. I don't want to just be looking at myself. I need to know you guys are going to be there.
Yeah.
So are you willing to match my commitment? So I keep the bar really high. And then on the practical side, what we do is we have a tool, Jason, that's called a discipleship journey. And it's a 1-year walk where I ask people to commit just to 2 hours a week. It's an hour on their own with their Bible. They watch a video, they dive into the material with their Bible. So they learn how to do that. And then it's an hour where they're in a small group. It could be just 2 people, it could be 10 people. And we ask 2 questions. The first question is, what did the Holy Spirit reveal to you while you were doing your thing this week for that hour? And the second one is this: how are you going to obey that in your life?
Hmm.
And see, that's where oftentimes the breakdown is, Jason, is like, think of a typical Bible study. And I love the Bible, so I'm not lowering the Bible. I'm just trying to raise disciple making. All right. But we have a Bible study and we shut it at 8 o'clock. We pray for one another and we go. Nobody asks the question, like, what did the Lord highlight to you here? And how are you going to obey that in your life? And so it just becomes information rather than heart transformation.
And the idea is to make disciples who then make disciples who then make, like the idea of making disciple
Exactly.
makers is to get the people that you disciple for a year to then take on that role of making disciples the next year, right?
That's exactly right. And I've got a little illustration in the book on this that I actually just did the math on it, and so I said, okay, what if I had 50 people and we all talked about this for a weekend, we all committed to it, say at a retreat, and we kind of, stack hands. Are you in? I'm in. You were stacking hands. We got 50 people that said, I'm committed for 1 year to find and disciple 2 people to the point that they can do the same. Okay. So then you bring them all back. Well, at the end of that first year, you have the original 50 plus the 100 then that the 50 have poured into. Well, that's 150 people. You just tripled it. Well, let's say at that weekend retreat, there's the same challenge. Okay. Well, after year 2, you got 450. Well, here's the real numbers, Jason. I wrote this down for you so I'd have it. After 18 years, you have 19,371,000,000 people, which is 20 years from now, in 2040, they're estimating the population to be 9 billion. So that's 10 more billion. And I always do that because someone's always going to say, but not everybody's going to do it. But if half do, like Jason, so let me just be pointed and say, this is still Jesus's original plan to change the world.
Right.
It's still, it's not the great suggestion. It's the great commission.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got to get back to making this a priority.
You can do this without having to live in the same area or even go to the same church too, right? This doesn't just mean me looking and identifying 2 people in my church, although I might do that. This could be through Zoom, right? You don't have to necessarily be with the person, like you said.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. And that's why it's always good to start with, in whose ears are my words big? Because, it might be somebody that lives on the opposite coast as you, but you just know you got favor there and they're open and teachable. They're fast, And so, yeah, I've been doing it this way on video conference calling now for about a decade. And then, of course, when I have friends living right here in town, and I do something every year called a leadership journey, where I take from January to June a group of, it's around a dozen leaders from all sectors of society, and it lets me go really deep with them for 6 months. And so, again, wiring too, Jason, determines how many. It's like for my wife, if she gets more than 4, it's like, no, I can't. I'm more of give me 10 or 12 because I'm a maximizer. If I'm going to do it for one, let me do it for, So there's no only one-on-one or Jesus did 12. It's just based on the person's wiring and what you have capacity for.
He is Dave Buehring. He's a pastor and author, and the book is called The Great Opportunity, Making Disciples of Jesus in Every Vocation. All right, as we wind down, I'm thinking about an athlete that you might come in contact with, or I might come in contact with, that listens to this show or that's looking for some spiritual guidance. And they say, Pastor Dave, does God really care about my job? So it's on, the idea isn't making disciples in the job, but does God care that I'm this or I'm that, or I'm a football player with the Vikings, or, I'm a coach or whatever? Does God really care about my job? What would you say?
I would say absolutely. And I would say that you have been made for that job. Oftentimes, Jason, I find when we get into the topic of calling, like what am I called to do? We kind of look out here. And I think we need to start by looking within of what God's already put in you. And so there are giftings and talents and spiritual gifts and things that God has put in you. And one of the things that I like to share with people is that every vocation is actually rooted in God's character. It's like for example, as an athlete, we know that God enabled Elijah to run after, he dealt with the prophets of Baal. He ate a little food and he beat a chariot to a location.
Right.
We see that God speaks to a coach through the area of discipline. And Paul talks about running the race and training well. But I mean, if you look at all different kinds of areas, like even what you do, Jason, in the media, the reality is Jesus is called the Word. and everything you do has to do with word and then visuals. And so I could go on and show you, for example, the master builder. God is the one that said, hey, Noah, go for wood, this size, this. Like, we have to realize that, yes, to the football player, the baseball player, the hockey player, the reality is you have been made for this, and you can glorify God by fulfilling the call of God on your life. And it's not, but here's the key in what we're talking about today. It's not only in what you do, it's how you live, it's how you relate, and it's how you reproduce those same things in the next generation of those coming up behind you to do it even better than we did it.
So it's LIONSHARE.org is the website, right? People can learn more and check out everything there.
Yes.
Awesome. Tell me about LIONSHARE, like the idea of actually calling it LIONSHARE and creating this little organization, I presume is what it is.
Yeah, it is. So about 20 years ago, this year, 2021, we hit 20. And so we have just focused on, being able to really come alongside, again, not only churches, but leaders in society, those that tend to be lions, they're leaders, and interrelating together, sharing life together in such a way that we can be influencers. And the end goal for us is fulfilling the Great Commission of Jesus. He said, go make disciples. And here's the thing. He said, teach them how to obey. And the thing we have to realize is Jesus isn't saying, obey me and prove your love to me by obedience. I think if we were with Jesus when he said it, I think this is what it looked like, Jason. You'll see me shrugging my shoulders. If you love me, you'll obey me. It's really about loving Jesus so much that disobedience is a ridiculous thought. See? Right. Yeah. And it's training people, discipling people to love Jesus like that. And that can make a difference. And so we spend a lot of time walking alongside leaders, walking alongside groups, churches, organizations, helping them catch vision for this and then practically equip them how to do it.
So as we wind down, last question, Dave, thinking about 2021 and the new year. And I know a lot of us are just like, goodbye, 2020. We are out of here. Let's go. Happy New Year. Let's go 2021. But what's the Lord been laying on your heart, maybe impressing on your heart as you think about what 2021 might look like, maybe a lesson that he's teaching you? What's he been showing you?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. I find in my own heart, I'm just so concerned about the issues at hand. There's between the ramifications of COVID, every family has dealt with this differently. Racial issues that need to be uprooted and solved, people who've lost their jobs, and are looking for how am I going to get things rectified this year? Relationships that maybe melted down through all of this stuff. There's all kinds of things in play. And I believe that we have a great opportunity to be able to step into that right now as followers of Jesus and to make a difference. But the difference isn't going to come just through yelling at something or shouting at something. It's like I told a group of Black leaders recently as we were talking about this, because there's some frustration of why aren't we seeing change yet? And here's the thing. The wonderful thing about protests, not riots, but protests, is you bring awareness and you gain momentum, but it doesn't actually execute change. And I believe the disciple-making game plan of Jesus is something that if we really worked hard at this and became more deliberate about it, that we could actually see not only change in my life and yours, but in our communities, in our society, in our nation, and the nations of the world. It's still his original plan to change the world.
The Great Commission. He is Dave Buehring. The book is called The Great Opportunity. You got another book coming out in 2021 as well, right?
Yeah, we've got several. What we're doing is we're creating disciple-making guides. So, nice. For example, if you're a business person or you're an athlete or you're a scientist, and we'll work on these over the next few years, but it's a 10-week journey that, like, for example, you could take, Jason, young media guys that want to be a godly person like you, want to do. You could say, hey, let's spend 10 weeks together, and you help disciple them to start thinking this way. So that's a project that we're working on now as well. Yeah.
That's awesome. And the website again is LIONSHARE.org. He is Dave Buehring. Thanks for joining us, my friend. This has been a great conversation, and let's do it again. Hopefully we'll get to meet in person sometime as well.
I'd love that. Thanks, Jason, for the time.
And many thanks to Dave Buehring for joining us here today on the show. I told you that was a awesome conversation with so many good pieces of wisdom, chock full of nuggets. I hope you took notes. And if you didn't, go back and listen again, because there's so much good stuff here that Dave talked about regarding discipleship. I thought the biggest takeaway on this one was, in whose ears are my words big? If you're looking for the person that you want to disciple, that you think God is calling you to disciple, and it might be somebody that goes to your church or is a friend of yours, but it might be somebody who you're friends with on social media and you've never met them, and you feel like maybe this is a place that I could pour into someone else and be poured into. And I love what Dave said about finding the person in whose ears are my words big. And that was a big one for me. That stood out. And I think Dave, first of all, is a great guy. And I think he's a real good resource here. Make sure you go check out his website, LIONSHARE.org, Lion, L-I-O-N, share.org, making disciple makers. And maybe you're thinking about 2021 here and wanting to be, more discipled in your walk, maybe wanting to disciple others, because that's the key here. That's the secret sauce in this whole church growth thing, is making disciples who are making disciples who are making disciples. So many thanks to Dave Buehring for joining us here today on the show. Really wish him nothing but the best. And thanks to you for tuning in as well. Make sure you check out our website, sportspectrum.com. You can find our Sports Spectrum podcast network there, our network of shows, Recalibrated with Mallory Brown, Table 40 with Matt and Leslie Holiday, our Football Sunday podcast, and of course, the mothership, this one right here, Sports Spectrum's podcast, are all available right there on the Sports Spectrum Podcast Network at sportspectrum.com. And whatever app you're listening to this podcast on, do us a favor, click that subscribe button so that you never miss an episode of our show. And that helps you, like I said, never miss an episode, but then tell others about some of the shows that we've had, some of the guests that we've had, and that helps get the word out. Over 2 million people have downloaded this podcast. Almost 1 million of you have listened in the past year. 2020 was an incredible year of growth for Sports Spectrum, and we're excited to see what God is going to do here in 2021. Again, we thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time right here on Sports Spectrum. My name is Jason. Love you guys. Have a great rest of your day.